My name is Moriba Jah, and I'm an aerospace engineering and engineering mechanics professor at the University of Texas at Austin, where I lead a transdisciplinary research program in space safety, security, and sustainability. And I've partnered with SpaceWatch.Global to start a new series of web talks, cafes, space cafes called Moriba's Vox Populi, which is Latin for people's voice. So I hope to see you there. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be candid conversations about all sorts of stuff related to space safety, security, and sustainability. I am a space watcher.
I'm Thorsten Greening, producer, technical hand and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. We are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. Difficult word. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcasts. We also opened our fan shop online for you, where you can support us actively and become a Space Watcher. Edition 1 has awesome merchandising products for you, your friends, and the ones you love. And your support is needed to keep our work alive, and we do that for you. If you have missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website, in the events section, and on YouTube. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to hand over to your host today, to Professor Moriba Jah. Over to you, Moriba.
Yes, thank you, everybody. It's great to be here with all of you again for this next session of Space Cafe's Moriba's Vox Populi, where the people have a voice kind of thing. We have an exciting topic today talking about security concerns in near space. Who knows, maybe we'll even chat about cislunar, since that seems to be a thing these days. And I have a great set of guests today on our show. We have Professor Dr. Kai-Uwe Schrogl, who's seconded to the European Space Agency, to the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. I have Dr. Laura Grego, senior scientist in the Global Security Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. Jeff Braxton sends his regards, wasn't able to make it today for some personal reasons. So I'll try to see if I can channel some of his thoughts since I know him a bit over the years. And then we have, Artem Mokhnatkin. He's a junior research fellow from the Keldysh Institute of Applied Mathematics, Russian Academy of Sciences. So this is great. Now, just to, as you know, this is all kind of like off the cuff. I don't really prep for these things. We just make it kind of live and organic. So to motivate the conversation today, I'll say this, right? Over the years, so I started working for the Air Force Research Lab, back in like 2007. And interestingly enough, over the years, I've seen kind of this sort of escalatory language, especially in the media. This country is doing that, so-and-so is doing this in space. We have development of, anti-satellite type stuff. Who knows who's doing what to whom. And it's a lot of, let's call it he said, she said sorts of things. This is not to say that threats don't exist, but there's a lot of this that I see in the media. Having chaired some NATO activities on space domain awareness, I can tell you that the technical knowledge about stuff in space regarding operations and whatnot is uneven. There's uneven knowledge. Even across NATO alliance members, the knowledge about space operations is quite uneven, which leads me to believe that the practice of space operations has to also be uneven because the knowledge base is not even. So that's a concern. So it tells me that capacity building kind of has to be part of whatever the right answer is to harmonizing or minimizing conflict and these sorts of things. I've seen, more and more commercial entities participating in the domain, and space security isn't just a thing for nation states. I don't know. I mean, companies, Acme Incorporated versus Das Vidanya LLC in space. Who knows? Like, everybody's trying to make money. People feel threatened if anybody is in their sort of orbital highway and that sort of stuff. So there's cultural context as well. I mean, even looking at things like the Outer Space Treaty and UN Convention on Space Object Registry, liability and damage. Yeah. So, I guess what I'm trying to get to is that ultimately people want peace. They don't want conflict. The last Moriba's Vox Populi session was about the role of theology in space sustainability and exploration. And the common theme was, look, we have differences in beliefs, but the common thing that we can kind of harmonize around is peace. So one of my questions, I guess, and I'm going to kind of open it up here to the panelists to get their take is, what are their opinions about, these issues of space security? I can tell you from my days as a security policeman in the US Air Force, which is where my career started, I was told that a threat required three concurrent things: opportunity for harm, capability to cause harm, and then intent to cause harm, right? I tell people, especially my students, if you want to know something, you have to measure it. And if you can't measure it directly, and if you're inferring things, that means that you're drawing conclusions mired in uncertainty. So uncertainty is part of everything. We don't know everything exactly. And so, how do you measure these things? How do you infer opportunity and capability to cause harm? How do you infer intent? There's no sensor that measures intent. And with dual use technology, clearly opportunity and capability can exist all the time in space. So then the real thing is the intent. And are there behaviors that we can agree upon that would kind of allay this issue of intent, which would help make things more transparent, predictable, so that we don't we can predict things and not be so alarmist with certain behaviors. So anyways, I've said a lot. Hopefully that lays a bit of the tone for a great discussion. And with that, I'd like to open it to any of our guests who'd like to comment on what I just said. Kai-Uwe.
Yeah, thank you, Moriba. Well, I'm not sure whether the question, does everybody want to have peace, or does anybody want to have war and conflict in outer space, is the right one. No, you answered it yourself. Normal people will not intend to have conflict or war. But, and there I think the real issue lies. It is about secularization. And we talk about security and security concerns in outer space. What we see is that we not have any more purely civilian, peaceful and military warlike activities in outer space. We have in between, and this is a continuum which is getting broader and broader, the security concerns also. And this might easily turn to, and this is the danger, I would say, turn to secularization, which means everything in outer space is regarded from the perspective of, is this threatening my security? And this is dangerous. This is dangerous. And we have to get out of that, and we must not allow that everything is regarded as a pure security threat. And we have to break that dynamic, which has had such awful consequences on Earth, with armament, with spirals of violence, and so on and so forth. I think this is something where we should actually look into, and this is the question we have to ask ourselves, and where we have to work to avoid this secularization.
Thank you for that. I just realized that I didn't introduce you, Jinyuan, so I apologize for that. So we have our colleague from China here as well. So Yes, good to have you. Anybody else have something to comment, especially with what Kai-Uwe just put out there? Laura,
Sure.
yeah.
Hi, thanks. That's a really interesting and useful perspective. I think I agree with that. I think when you talk about intent, there's a number of ways to look at it. States, especially militaries, tend to plan for the worst case scenarios. So they'll look at technologies and say, what's the worst thing you can do with this? Are they threatening me? And how do I protect against this? And how do I make sure I don't fall behind in a technological arms race? And so an arms race sort of dynamic can easily be generated without, any intentional process to break that, which, we have those processes in other domains that we've used before, nuclear weapons, conventional weapons, and ways to talk about that. So that's particularly helpful with things that really look like weapons, that look really militarized, that look oversized for their mission, that look like they could, push mass really fast towards something else. So those are, obvious places to start to have those conversations to try to break that intent stranglehold. But then you mentioned, Moriba, in your beginning remarks, another point which is really important too, the dual use technologies, which can look threatening or they might not look threatening. And then you have to think of other ways, other tools that you make sure that you try to figure out how to communicate intent between each other, especially when countries don't have great communication pathways. The United States and Russia has a long history of talking to each other and has sort of set up some mechanisms for dispute resolution, and we have experience there. The US and China doesn't do that, doesn't have a good history of doing that. That would be really helpful to have those channels to say, hey, you're doing something here that looks wrong to me. Who do I talk to disambiguate what's happening? Or you can set up other sort of physical processes, like I think the canonical dual use technology that people turn to are these closely approaching satellites that can get close to someone else without their invitation or without their cooperation. And you can certainly use that to refuel or to build, big structure. You'll need that to build big structures or to inspect or to do anything like that, but it's also something that can facilitate disrupting that other satellite. You might, of course, create a protocol for saying, hey, I'm coming close to you. Is that okay? Or if I come close to you without communicating my intent, then I can assume I might be more apt to assume malign intent. But if there's a process for communicating intent, really intentionally, I think that's like one place to start to break that.
Second of all, I think Moriba's you proposed three dynamics: opportunity, capacity, intent. I think that's really useful, and I also agree that sometimes it's difficult. I mean, it's easy to infer whether there is an opportunity and whether there is capacity. Intent is really difficult, and I think this is the most difficult issue we are having now in space arms control. For example, you may have heard of the PBWT, which China and Russia proposed and defines space weapons, with intent as one of the elements of space weapons. And this is the difficult issue. So perhaps, if you really want to, define a kind of space weapon by intent, it would be very difficult. And maybe we can somewhat complement that, from the perspective of behavior. And it's not perfect because some states will think that, this is not perfect. It would not effectively control space weapons because at that time when a behavior happens, then it would be too late. So I think that's the difficult issue nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Artem, do you have anything you'd like to add, or?
So I would like to say something from my point of view that is more practical, because I am co-managing the International Scientific Optical Network, and we all the time we bind all several entities with having diverse interests and different social cultural backgrounds, only based on agreements and technical cooperation, and usually without or with minimum liability. So, and of course, that I think is crucial is to set data sharing between all stakeholders, but frankly speaking, it would not be a surprise that for those who work in the field, there are many limitations on with whom we can cooperate and how, depending on the country of your entity. For example, imagine we offer to buy some like observing data, observing time, or orbital data, but who will buy it? From the Western countries, almost nobody. Okay, then imagine if we offer this data for free, who will be then formally interested in the Western countries? Again, almost nobody. So only some individual entities under certain conditions. At the same time, there can never be too much of data, especially if it's non-two-line elements data. And but of course, here we encounter not only external restrictions on data sharing, but also internal ones. Most of them about concerns doing something wrong at the local level, and so I think that such obstacles in both directions in data sharing in various countries could contribute to undermining to space security as a whole. And for example, there are some organizations providing information on maneuvers and orbital data, like Space Data Association. There are organizations aimed to promote standards and guidelines, like the Space Safety Coalition. But as far as I know, in the Space Safety Coalition and in the Space Data Association, there are no Russian entities, no Chinese entities. Why? Of course.
Good question. Why is that?
Isn't a coincidence, and it's a complex problem. And there are interagency organizations like IADC or CCSDS, with, for example, with Russian participation, but negotiating at such a high level can be lengthy and heavy, politicized. So, and I would maybe like to say that maybe this situation could be resolved by developing an open international inclusive database on objects orbiting the Earth at the level of research and educational organizations, and of course based on non-legally binding cooperation.
So I got to tell you, I like that. Certainly, as your academic colleague in the United States, I fully agree with that sort of stuff. I think that being able to have shared and cross-referenced registries and databases is one thing that makes sense. Certainly, I've heard from several people, right? Like, Laura brought this up about, close approaches and these sorts of things. I guess one of the things that I'd like to hear from people, if anybody has an opinion on this, is, I've heard from several folks that certainly launching into the same orbital plane as other people, or close approaches, and coming up with protocols. What kind of behaviors? I don't know. What kind of behaviors do people feel are things that raise concern or cast doubt, in terms of the intent piece? And does anybody have like suggestions aside from saying, okay, open communication, but anybody have any suggested kind of protocols that could allay that sort of intent piece?
So I can continue my idea with an open database, if you would like.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
So I imagine this as an international service with several nodes on the parity basis, one per country of the main stakeholders. So in this concept, every node entity should provide all available orbital data to other members, of course, taking into account local security restrictions. Each node entity should have access to all raw data of this service. Each node does, for example, a risk assessment of close approaches, maneuvers, and etc. Whatever you want. So and they could do this at the same time. So it could be several solutions available for every event at once, and data consumers, they can compare which solution is better for their purposes, so they can see even that they fit to each other. Then we can trust simultaneously to several entities, and like something similar there is in the international GNSS service, where you can get different ephemeris solution for navigational satellites, and this service should provide open access to all orbital data to everyone. I think that it's important because it's crucial to avoid making profit by any party by using the data of other members. And also openness is good to gather more data and for outreach. For instance, this service can accept data from anyone who can prove that this data is reliable. It could be both research or education organizations and amateurs. So we can just designate codes to their observing sites if their data are accurate. So we routinely you can use their data to improve orbits and discoveries of new objects, like the Minor Planet Center. Of course, we should provide feedback to these entities and individuals to incentivize them, report on their contribution to the entire database, like how efficient their observations were, mentioned if some discoveries of fragments happened, maybe such database even can trigger a kind of space debris fever among amateurs. And one more thing that I suppose that is the best. If not, organizations will have a high degree of national governmental funding, because it could help to implicitly legitimate the system in the countries of these nodes, not entities, and perhaps in the time the system will prove its sustainability and move a high level to an interagency cooperation.
Yeah, I think these are great ideas. I'd love to hear. No, thank you for that, Artem. I'd love to hear if anybody else on the panel has opinions about this.
Hi, Moriba, if I may.
Yeah.
Yes, I think, for states who wants to make peaceful use of outer space, I don't think they want to be interfered or interfere others, purposely. And in most cases, I mean, so for instance, if a weather satellite of China and then there's another, weather satellite of another country, neither side wants to be interfered by the other. But the tricky thing is that, there are some kind of space activities who are intended to, for instance, to get close to another, to what they are doing. And I think in time of peace, if there is potential interference, and for example, the outer space provides for the obligation of prior consultation, that's very clear. But the problem is, in this kind of intentional, spying, information gathering issues, well, some would argue there's still an obligation to consult in advance, but it would be absurd to expect this conducting state to consult in advance, saying that, well, I'm going to spy you, can I do that? And this is the tricky thing, and I think this is perhaps what we are talking about when we discuss the issue of, for instance, potential interference. And I think Artem proposed, very good ideas, for example, the sharing of issues, the sharing of information. It's a pity that,
because I guess that we have to start from something, and it's much easier to do at the level of research organizations, not of agencies. And because, of course, the only way to resolve this problem is the awareness from different points of view what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, it's rather simple, but in terms of political will, it's rather complex. For example, states are usually reluctant to even register, their satellites, in a timely fashion. And I believe, for example, the General Assembly adopted a set of, a resolution on the registration of space objects, maybe in the year 2007. Kai-Uwe, you know better than me. And that is not legally binding, and states, only comply voluntarily, and not many states really do so. So the thing is, the lack of political willingness to do so. Yeah, thank you.
Kai-Uwe, okay.
Yeah, thank you. I fully agree with Jinyuan and Artem. Let me go one step back. During the past decade or so, I was so surprised. I'm constantly surprised that everybody in the space community thinks that she or he has to develop all the political concepts of security, peaceful purposes, and so on anew. I'm really surprised that our community does not want or cannot learn from other areas. I really cannot understand that, because everything we need is already there. All the concepts for maintaining peace, for maintaining stability are already there. Transparency and confidence building measures, TCBM, they have been developed 40 years or more ago. And this is what we need in outer space: transparency, data sharing. We have to know what is going on. Transparency, number one. And then confidence building. Confidence. You gain confidence while knowing what the other is doing. The behavior of others, which also has to be restricted. And there we are. We all have it in front of us. We just have to grapple it. And then we should look, what are the areas which we can learn from? We can learn from disarmament and arms control. Since the 50s, the concepts are there. We can use them. We have to learn from the three other adjacent areas, which is air traffic, which is frequency management, and which is maritime traffic. We even have, for maritime traffic, conventions which are there to avoid misperceptions when encountering on the high seas. This is stuff which we simply have to learn, to understand, to acknowledge, and then also to use. During the past 10 years or so, we did a lot of studies on space traffic management and so on. And every good STM study looks also into the questions: how is maritime traffic, how is air traffic, how is the management of frequencies conducted, and what can we learn? And we can learn a lot of things, and it will make space a more peaceful and a better managed area.
Laura, thank you, Kai-Uwe. Laura.
Thanks. That's so interesting. I think one answer to your question, why we haven't progressed more, is that there are definitely some actors and there's some behaviors which are not well underpinned by technical realities. I think there are some actors who may still think that they can secure a unilateral advantage in space and not be challenged, that there's a way to circumvent the mutual vulnerability, which is an essential feature of working in space, that you can't secure your own interests unilaterally. It just doesn't work. And also like an underpinning sense that you can do things in space, you can do things that are hidden for some long period of time. Somehow there's this persistent conception that you can do things that people won't notice. And you'll even I think it was last year, when you saw some of the close approaches by Russian satellites or things that maybe the United States didn't necessarily want to talk about, but amateur, I actually don't like to call them amateurs, so skilled hobbyists, observers notice this, and they don't have the same restrictions that a government would, and they talk about what they notice. And so there's this sense that, that this overclassification, which doesn't help these conversations. So I think there are some persistent, non-technically grounded ways of thinking that need to be dislodged. It's not just political. But I would argue, so just to stitch some of these themes that my co-panelists have been talking about, if you go back to, Kai-Uwe talked about TCBMs. We've been talking about those for decades. They agree. There's really nicely matured ideas that people have come up with that would contribute to security. But I do think it helps to be really specific about what problem you're trying to solve. And I think that is part of one of the problems with getting organized, whether you're talking about, let's preserve the space environment from debris or make it more efficiently used, beef up our traffic management so that it's efficient, so that we're not interfering, so that you're not always worried that somebody's going to get in your way, that you can operate safely. That's, a set of solutions that could make that work that would optimize for that. I come from a security perspective, where I think, one of my concerns, one of my big concerns, is that misperception or conflicts in space start to reflect back on the ground, and we get into real dangerous territory there, that either you generate a crisis or you exacerbate a crisis by something that happens in space. And I think those solutions can be different. So you have to, and that's part of, I think, why we keep getting stymied with some of the solutions. But if for example, when you're talking about close approach of satellites, people have talked about keep out zones for a long time, right? And that's, whether that's legally or physically, reasonable, I think you could do it. But then the arms controller says, but you can always design a weapon that can work from a standoff, from that standoff region. So you're not protecting your satellite. So if you're thinking that my job is to make sure that nothing ever happens to this particular satellite, that's right. But if your job is instead, I want to make sure that I don't accidentally start a crisis because I think somebody's doing something that they're getting in my space, or they're coming close to attack me, then it's a different value, right? You're trying to create transparency. You're trying to create transparency of intent, which comes back to what you were talking about, Moriba, is if you're coming close, then you are signaling something specific to me. If you're coming close without explaining yourself, you're doing something specific. And then to kind of talk about what Artem was talking about, who gets to decide who is how close and who's measuring that, you would certainly want to have a honest broker who collects those data and says, even if the government doesn't want to talk about it, we're going to talk about what we see, and we see this thing happening. And this goes against the rules that you've all agreed to about getting too close to each other. And I know space is increasingly crowded. And one of the things we do at my organization is we have a space database of the actively operating satellites. And that job has just become so much harder over the last few years because it's sort of tripled with all these small, lower mass satellites in these big constellations. But you can imagine just choosing the most important ones, which are going to be the most crisis-inducing satellites, the ones that are really problematic, that you really want to make sure nobody comes close to without an explanation. And that seems to be a much easier problem to solve from a data or an observational or computational standpoint. And that doesn't seem to me to be at all out of reach of our political will, our technological ability, or our ability to have a sort of open source backup of government data. That seems to be, especially if you're talking about in geosynchronous orbits, where that's just sort of, things are all much more orderly. It seems like a good place to start, in my opinion, where you just get started in one corner, where you build the trust, you build the mechanisms, and then you figure out what else you could do.
I love that, Laura. Before I get back to probably Jinyuan and others, let's bring somebody from the audience, Andrew Swaghammer, to ask a question. So Andrew, this is your chance to interact and make it good, my brother.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for allowing me to ask a question. So I'll make it quick because everyone wants to hear you guys speak, not me.
This thing's called Moriba's Vox Populi for a reason, bro. So it means that you are part of the Vox Populi. So don't feel rushed here. I mean, we're having a candid conversation. So take your time and lay it all out.
Got it. So I guess one question that I wanted to ask was about the types of approaches that have been taken or could be taken in order to achieve this kind of trust and confidence building. It seems to me, I'm relatively new to the field of space sustainability, so feel free to correct any assumptions that I have. But it seems to me that a lot of the recent work being done to advance these concepts of safety, sustainability, and security have been done by, I'm hesitant to call them completely non-political actors, but for in large part industry consortiums. I think Artem, you brought up Space Data Association, Space Safety Coalition, at least from a Western perspective. or academic efforts such as the ones that Moriba has been extensively involved in. In other words, kind of more of a bottom-up approach from non-political actors versus a top-down approach from state-based actors. I wanted to ask what all of you felt is the potential for similar types of bottom-up approaches from kind of outside the quote-unquote Western sphere, right? US and Europe and things like that. Is there potential for, similar coalitions and academic approaches from emerging space actors, say in African space nations or in Chinese and the Russian space communities? Are these kinds of efforts going on? And if so, how can we connect them to the efforts that are being made kind of on the other side? If they're not, why isn't that? And is this kind of the correct way to be going about it? Thanks.
Wow, I can't wait to see who steps into answering that. Kai-Uwe.
Excellent question, Andrew, and I can give a positive answer. First of all, there are already academic studies which have been conducted with the absolutely inclusive authorship. So the STM studies of the International Academy of Astronautics of 2006 and 2018 had participants from all over the world, so Russia, China, but also developing countries were involved, Brazil, so emerging space powers or strong space powers already at that time, Brazil, India, and also Africa. So I would say we already have a community there which is really active. We also have the three big international non-governmental organizations, IAF, IAA, and IISL. And all three, I'm president of IISL, the International Institute of Space Law. We also have a global membership, and we engage everybody in these discussions. So we really have a dialogue which is universal, I would say. And then on the governmental side, we already have the agenda item on space traffic management in the legal subcommittee of UN COPUOS. So there is a field where every of the 100 member states of UN COPUOS can raise their voice. And this, I think, provides at least the platforms for a dialogue, not only amongst a few space powers, but also a universal dialogue amongst everybody who is interested, and we even actively encourage everybody to get involved.
Excellent, Kai-Uwe. I know that we just brought on Angela Matisse to the stage, but does anybody else want to answer Andrew? Okay, Angela, you're on.
Hello all, absolutely fascinating and wonderful to see the perspectives from around the world, because this is what it needs. So I think, there is a discussion about whether the top-down doing sort of, we go from the military, so we should, or whether it's from the bottom up. We talk about just, we have to do this as a species. We have to just figure out systems that we all trust and respect. And I think there's something in data. My question was, is there, focusing, well, we want, I heard Artem saying, well, would we trust the data from the West? Or what, I don't want to paraphrase what you said. But if the data was, we devised a protocol and the data was irrefutable, the way it was captured, the process of capturing, and it was irrefutable. Probably before that, my other question was, if we had observation, so sensing and observation, and people maybe, because it's so vast and people can say, well, you didn't spot me and I was there and I didn't register because it is so vast. If we finally get enough, and I don't know if that's even, I don't know where the threshold is in terms of observation, but if there is nowhere to hide, because I think, Kai-Uwe, you used the example of the airspace and the maritime. Yes, the seas are vast, and yes, the airspace is vast, but we do kind of spot stuff. The difference is here we're talking about a vast observation domain. If we got to a point where observation was such that there wasn't a place to hide, and then you could create a protocol, and some have touted blockchain or whatever, that you captured that, and then there was a platform which wasn't really owned by any specific state, but then behaviors, like a lot with human behaviors, we would then just have a kind of, I'm Scottish, but a gentlemanly behavior as around the globe, that sort of, but we're holding people, we're holding everybody sort of accountable, and because these things would be irrefutable. Is that an imaginable scenario? That's what I put out to you.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I want to open it up to people here. I think the answer is yes. I think that just like the IGS has redundant data centers and analysis centers, like Artem had put out there, I think that is a model that has a lot of success and establishes some precedents that these things could work out that way. But certainly, I want to open it up to anybody else here on the panel that might want to answer, Angela. Kai-Uwe.
Yes, I also completely agree. And we are now entering a field which is rather new for the governance of outer space. So far, we only have agreements regarding the status of outer space and the status of the actors in outer space. We do not have any binding agreements on the behavior in outer space, and we do not have any binding agreements on the information we learn about outer space, which is space situational awareness, and also we don't have any notification agreements and anything which is around that. And this is also very important, we do not have any verification mechanisms. And Dorin Prunario, I saw him pointing at that in Q&A. Dorin has been chairman of the UN Corpus, so he's a capacity in that field. We don't have verification and we don't have enforcement in outer space. Up to now, we did not really need any of these elements I just pointed at, but now we need them and we have to develop them. And this will be a big, not only evolution, but a revolution in space law. It will be a big bang. And we have to tackle it. It will be really difficult. It is a completely new concept for outer space, together then with TCBMs. And of course, the states are super afraid of what is happening now. Can we still control it? Will it be beneficial? Will it be used against us? But in my personal opinion, we have to go that path. It will take us 10 years, 15 years. Compare it with the law of the sea, which also was negotiated for 15 or even 20 years. But we have to take that effort. It will be a top-down thing, which of course will be prepared by a lot of activities, be it governmental, non-governmental, bottom up. But in the end, all these elements I just pointed out will have to come top down in a big bang, and I hope that we will manage it by the end of this decade.
I think that's great, Kai-Uwe. I think there's two things that I want to kind of pull on. One of them was what Laura said in terms of start in a corner and kind of develop these sort of protocols, maybe identify some satellites where you say, look, before you come close, where close is blank, let me know. And here's how you get a hold of me. And here's a mechanism that where I'm receptive to the communication and that sort of stuff, and just start on just a few things and kind of work it that way. I think that's a great idea. And on something that Jinyuan said regarding the people looking at each other and that sort of stuff, I want to pull on that a little bit and just say, in this idea of the transparency where everybody can verify and validate and look at each other, do you think that I don't know, from your perspective, not that you're going to speak for all of China, right? But it's like, from your perspective, do you feel that's a good thing, or that would be something that China could get behind, this idea of, I don't know, everybody's looking at everybody else all the time, and that's just a known thing. Everybody's doing surveillance and looking and monitoring other people. And I guess before you answer that, going back to probably some of Laura's own background, with nuclear deterrence, everybody knows where everybody's stuff is at, right? So everybody's monitoring all that stuff. And I can tell you that as a security policeman at Malmstrom Air Force Base, I remember one time that there was a specific truck that, the trucks that do the missile maintenance, they have serial numbers and all this other stuff. And I remember that there was a truck that used to go to a specific site that was getting repaired, and so another truck went to that site, and it was within hours that we got calls, from at that time Soviet Union to headquarters, Strategic Air Command, all that stuff is like, why is this truck going to this site today instead of like this other truck, right? So it's like everybody knows. So is that, do you folks feel that would be a welcomed behavior? I mean, it's already kind of happening, but if it was like an acknowledged, this is the way things are, do you feel that would be welcomed?
Well, I mean, to get close and look at what others are doing, obviously increase transparency, but it's also normal, those who are watched, they do not really want to be watched. And I think that's normal. And I think the problem is, if one wants to, if we are talking about, spying, quote unquote, in space, one satellite vis-a-vis another, and if one wants to watch the other, it naturally would have to get close to it, and that triggers the problem. I think if one is approached very close, sometimes I think 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers, and the other side would see this as probably as a threat, and it's hard to distinguish, as you said at the beginning, intent. What's the really, what is the intent really? And this would be especially, worried. The state would be very worried if the satellite is one of fundamental significance. For instance, one used, for instance, for related to nuclear weapons. I remember a few years ago when a French satellite was used for this purpose was approached, and it was it really created some anxieties. I think there's a conflict here. Thanks.
Sorry, anybody else? Let's bring up Michael Maloney, Torsten, while other people think here. Thanks, Angela.
Can you
Michael? Hear me? Yeah.
This is a fascinating conversation. Thank you for this. It's really needed, and we need to work this through. And it just occurred to me that, we focus too much on the ways that we might circumvent these agreements, and we worry about those cases. Ships still turn off their AIS transponders, and people build stealth technology to avoid radar, but it doesn't stop us from having traffic management in these other domains. And as complex as space traffic management is, and it's complicated by debris to a great extent, obviously prior notification and transparency are the keys. And so I think that, the idea that everybody launches something in space and reports on its location, telling everybody where it is, not necessarily what it's doing, but where it is, I think is a good first step to getting this done. What does everybody think about that? We need to report on where they're at.
Laura.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that some of that burden should be shifted to the space operators to make themselves more easily trackable. Right? Especially if your satellite has some mobility. For example, especially your satellite has more than just the normal station keeping capability, but is the kind of thing that is harder to track because in between observations it moves. So I would think a really good protocol, should we ever get to what Kai-Uwe was suggesting, a really comprehensive thing is to shift some of that burden to those to make yourselves trackable as the cost of having this capability, right? It sounds a little like people wouldn't agree to it, but imagine, as we get to be more and more congested in space, it's grown so much and so fast that that it truly is pretty challenging to. I'm not a professional like Artem and Moriba are in tracking at all, but it's got to be more and more complex now that we have so many more objects that you have to keep track of, but plus so many more objects that move unpredictably. You want to shift that burden, and that's sort of a sign of good faith. Like that's what here I am. This is what I'm doing, and even if you imagine, as Jinyuan said, you might want to be observing somebody else, and that might be actually, we decide that's okay. You get one visit every 6 months or something, and you tell me when you're going to come close. I don't know, right? I mean, why not?
Moriba, can I follow up on this a little bit?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So my point is that the days of we launch it, you find it, have to end. We have to start actually reporting on where our objects are. It's not up to us to find your object or make it more trackable. Tell us where it is. If you tell us where it is, we don't have to go looking for it with radars. It's scalable. If everybody tells us where everything is that they own in space for the entire time it's in space, even when it's not operating anymore, the burden transfers to those people putting objects in space and not to those who are trying to build radar sensitive enough to see it.
So I would just, that's a good vision, Michael, and I would turn this back to others to say, so not everybody who launches also has capacity to track everything all the time, right? Or not everyone who owns an object. So whose job is that? I mean, you might buy a ride on a space launcher and you buy the capacity on it, but you certainly don't buy your own radars. So then, I mean, I actually don't think it's impossible technically, but that becomes a pretty interesting case. And I guess I would also put this in, which we haven't talked too much about, which is the commercial satellite sector, which is increasingly dominating space activity. They don't always weigh in on these kinds of questions. They kind of stay out of the fray of the geopolitics part of it. But that's not possible, indefinitely when you're talking about these kinds of activities that might impact them. So I would be very interested to see, SpaceX doesn't have radars, as far as I know. Nothing. So they got to buy their data from somebody. So, or they've got to build it, or there's something like Moriba's or Artem's consortia, or there's something that we build that's like the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization, which has its own dedicated sensors to monitor those agreements, right? That's just created specifically for that.
They do have telemetry, however.
Yes.
Well,
yep.
Yeah. Kai-Uwe, thank you, Laura.
Well, space law, international space law is absolutely clear on that. In Article 6, it is required that the appropriate state, as it is called, exercises continuous supervision and control over any, be it governmental or non-governmental space objects. But actually, I doubt that all the states are able to do that. Sometimes they don't even want to do that. So we have to find new rules in order to enforce that also. And it's again transparency. We have now satellite AIS, automated identification system. But this is not in space, but it's on the ground. It's for ships. It's a wonderful system where with a small sensor on each ship, you have a wonderful map of where the ships are on the high sea. Automated identification systems. We can and have to have that also in outer space. On each single satellite, we need such a little device where we then know where it is. And then the other point on transparency, because this is only the situational element, is the intentional element. And this is that we have to know, and the actors and the operators have to tell as soon as they maneuver. It starts with the launch. We don't have pre-launch notifications. We only have a registration request from the registration convention, which is after the launch, and it can be months after the launch. We need something pre-launch notification. We have that in some other arrangements, the Hague Code of Conduct, but it's not binding international law. And we need something like notifications before maneuvers are done in outer space. And we have to find and come up with rules for that. And this would be extremely stabilizing, and it would help everything we are now discussing to make space more foreseeable, more peaceful than anything else.
I think that's great. Look, we've got just over 10 minutes left here, and I wanted to bring Artem into this and say, look, man, from somebody who tracks stuff all the time, what do you think is too close? So at what point is it difficult for you to distinguish two objects, right? I mean, I think there's a technical limit to what too close may be for somebody who's trying to independently monitor stuff. You can choose not to answer the question if you don't feel comfortable with that, but I'm curious, like, what do you think too close is from a technical perspective?
I suppose that starting 5 kilometers, it's becoming can be considered as a close approach event. So that starting that we like.
So 5 kilometers in LEO or regardless, geo as well.
I'm talking about geostationary region, of course.
Okay.
So for medium orbits, the same, because we now we don't do a close approach analysis for LEO.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And let's see. So with that said, with 10 minutes left, let's see. I want to see, does anybody have does anybody have any kind of remarks that they feel that they wanted to say that maybe they didn't get a chance to say? In that case, let's bring up one more person here. Let's bring up this Tony Marshall-say.
Hello
Tony.
there.
Yeah, go ahead, ask your question, bro.
Okay, I'm concerned about space junk.
Me too.
I distinguish between junk and debris. Okay. Junk is anything that went up there to worked, and is now dead. It's also whatever took it up there. That is basically second stages. And there's a lot of them, hundreds of them, all lying around. And now we have debris from explosions and from collisions. People have made tests to see about deorbiting, but most of those are inefficient. Because if you put up one thing to take one thing down, you're increasing the junk because the second stage that took it up there is there. So you've got a net increase. You have to have something like I think it's Astroscale, that have a mothership and hunters, and say half a dozen hunters, so that the half a dozen hunters can take out debris and deorbit, and then the mothership goes down, and then you get a lot of junk removed, and so the junk pile actually reduces. Now, I want to reuse those second stages to build a synthetic gravity space station, because we know from ISS that zero gravity is no good for humans, but we don't know how the human body will react to moon gravity or to Mars gravity. If you build a synthetic gravity space station, one of these pinwheels that's been made for decades, you can actually create those gravities and find out for real whether we can live a long time on the moon or on Mars or whatever. We can also have a 1G area where you can not only have space tourism, but you can have regular technicians using regular Earth-style tools and regular Earth techniques to haul in satellites, fix them up, refurbish them, and perhaps resell them on to people who can't afford to launch them in the first place. Now, all that will reduce the junk pile. But the point is, based on what Kai-Uwe was saying, 10 to 15 years to come to an agreement, at the rate things are going up into space, is space going to get so crowded that we can't launch safely anymore?
All right. Well, anybody have anything they want to add on to that? Look, I can tell you this, Tony. I certainly, one of the things that I feel needs to be put in place and is sustainability metrics, right? Like quantifying orbital carrying capacity for any one of these orbital highways, a carbon footprint analog like a space traffic footprint to understand the burden that any given object poses on other stuff. And once we can have these metrics, then we can see what the environmental impact is, what objects are taking up capacity. Then we can kind of start monetizing this, come up with a tow truck service to provide capacity back. Maybe the capacity gets managed like the ITU, where the licensing process goes through this international organization where you have to request capacity for some time. I don't know. These are all just ideas floating in my head, and your concerns are duly noted, my friend. So I thank you very much. Final thoughts from people. We got 5 minutes to go, so let's final thoughts. Let me just kind of, who would like to go first? Okay, in that case, I'm going to call on Artem. Final thoughts.
Space policy is good, but to consider some hypothetical cases, etc. But I think that we have just to start cooperate to provide that transparency, because in practice, because we don't have much time to for, as Tony said, 15 years where we just have a small amount of time to resolve the space debris problem, and also that space traffic management and security.
Nice. Thank you. Laura.
Thanks for the invitation to be here and to be with all of you big thinkers. I think I've been happy to at least see a softening or more openness from the U.S. At this point to moving forward in the venues that we have, like the Conference on Disarmament and United Nations, to talk about norms and rules of the road. So I hope that maybe that signals that we'll make a little progress during this administration. As we said, there's no shortage of great ideas. I put in the chat a link to a new report by colleagues Jessica West and Gilles Dessat, who talked to a lot of people to come up with what they thought about norms in space, what they are, what they might be. There's a lot of help there. And I would say I'm going to echo everyone else's point of view that there's really no time to lose. I mean, it's just the problem gets harder and harder to solve the more you leave it alone. So a non-choice to take action is actually a choice. Non-action is actually a sort of laissez-faire, doesn't I don't think serve from a space environmental point of view or a security point of view. So I think I'd like to see the energy here, and I hope that that also is reflected in these official top-down places where decisions get made, and in these ground-up places like here where new ideas percolate. So thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Jin.
First of all, let me second one of Laura's comments that nowadays it's simply not realistic to dominate or predominate or overwhelm another in space or from Earth to space. It's very important to keep in mind that to have conflict in space is simply a lose-lose situation to everybody. And the second point is we should talk about space in a broader context. Sometimes we make some progress in space traffic management, for example, and then a small setback in another area could have a backlash on this. And I think this is true vice versa. And I think perhaps we should also thinking of for example making some progress in space in order to create some kind of incentive for states to cooperate more closely. For example, space cooperation in space. Why not? Thank you.
Thank you, Jin. And Kai-Uwe, you have your book on space security that you didn't mention, but what are your closing thoughts?
I would refer to space as a global common. We only have 3 global commons: Antarctica, the high sea and the deep seabed, and space. And they are all under stress. And I think we have to take up our responsibility of preserving the global commons with all the philosophical as well as political repercussions. And we have to remind the decision makers and everybody in our sector about that. And when I say remind decision makers, then I encourage really everybody to talk to politicians. You now say, what does he say? Well, I shall talk with politicians. They are not interested in that. No, to the contrary. I have been dealing for decades now with politicians. And I tell you, when a citizen with concerns approaches a politician, they listen. And if you can explain them, tell them what is wrong, what should be done, they listen. They might not act immediately, but they have heard it and they listen. And this is super important. All of us, we are academics also, we are in various fields, and I can only encourage everybody to communicate what we need, and this is what we just discussed, and to communicate it to everybody, including politicians and decision makers. It's the only way then to maybe shorten a little bit the decade or 15 years, what I said, and which was criticized in the Q&A of setting up international or national rules. Maybe we can reduce it then by half, but communicate, that's my plea, communicate it to everybody that there is a need and that we have to also do that and consider this under the scope of space as a global common, which is important also for a universal acceptance, not only the spacefaring countries, but also the latecomers, the developing countries, and those who might only benefit from space in the future.
Thank you very much. So with that, it's we're gonna bring Torsten back up to say final words and then wrap it up and thank each and every one of you.
Yeah, fascinating conversation. Was really great to listen to all of you. So if we can have the slides back up or from our, thank you, from the tech team. So the next Moriba's Vox Populi is planned for Thursday, again, the 10th of June. So expecting that none of us will be on vacation, because why should we? So you all have a chance to be back again. So, and then we plan for few more events. So tomorrow, I have the great pleasure to host the first conference on space outreach called Impulse 21 at 4 p.m. our Central European summertime. And next week we will have our busy week again. So I will start the 33 minutes with Robert Feuerbach on the new launcher market, followed on Wednesday the Space Café, the second edition of the Space Café Brazil, featuring Alia Raquel. And on Thursday, so that's something you should pinpoint in your calendar, we have our next Space Café Summit called Where Are We Going? And our editor-in-chief, Markus Peyer, will be in a conversation with Professor Pascal Ehrenfreund, Ken Hodgkins, and Dr. Peter Martinez from the Secure World Foundation about this topic. And I think that will be very fascinating dialogue that the four will have. On the 19th, we will have our second edition of the Space Café UAE. And then I have the pleasure in 2 weeks to speak with Teresa Hitchens. And it's called Star Trek or Star Wars, Our Future of Military Space. All events are online on Eventbrite, and as always, we would like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up to our daily and our bi-weekly newsletters, and if you like to treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us to continue our work, so take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.SpaceWatch.Global. Thank you very much for your interest today, and thank you, Moriba, and thank you to all your panelists for this exciting or inspiring conversation, and thanks to the entire team for doing their great and seamless job week by week, day by day. Again, hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks for joining us, and I hope to see you tomorrow or next week. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher.
All right, cheers, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.